So we went live on the YouTube, so that's the format that we'll be using to stream everything besides Zoom. So I just want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. We have some really good speakers to learn and listen to from tonight. So first, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Monique Walker. I'm an intern at Foundation for Liberating Minds, serving on the Global Vision team. And I'm majoring in global studies and political science at Oklahoma State University. And so I've always had an interest in international affairs. So being on this team has been really eye-opening, very interesting for me, which is one of the primary reasons that I joined FLM, mainly just because I love the vision and the different perspectives, and along with the different variety of audiences that we try and connect with, which brings us to tonight's event. So we have 3 guest speakers tonight, Dr. Alyson Greiner, Cynthia Garcia, and Estefania Narárez. And I'll give their brief biography shortly. But we have a variety of topics that we will be discussing tonight, ranging from global empathy to international solidarity, and overall ways that we can be aware of things that are happening in the international community, and ways that we can help and be more aware of those, followed by a Q&A at the end with viewer audience questions. So our first speaker, as I stated previously, is Dr. Alyson Greiner. She's a professor of global studies and geography at Oklahoma State University. I'm just going to have you wave so people know it's you. There she is. And then our next guest is Cynthia Garcia, and I'll have you wave as well. Yes. And she is the United We Dreams National Campaign Manager for Community Protection. And then lastly, we have Estefania Narárez, and they are the organizing director of Uprooted and Rising. And they wanted me to briefly state that they're on a short break right now, but they're still involved. If you have any inquiries about the organization, you can definitely ask them. So thank you guys again for joining us tonight. And we're going to go ahead and get into the first question. So this will be for Dr. Greiner, and you guys can definitely jump in after if you have anything else you want to say for the other 2 speakers. So first off, what is the importance of global empathy, and what are ways that people can administer and grow into this identity?
Thank you, Monique. So this is a big question, but I think given our current circumstances with the pandemic, it has brought the importance of empathy to the forefront. I mean, we keep setting these new records for infections as well as deaths from this disease, this virus. And so I would hope that empathy is on a lot of people's minds. And it is a pressing topic as much now as it ever has been. So I would like to encourage and support initiatives that promote an awareness of difference and an acceptance of difference, so that people can just gain a comfort in terms of relating with those who don't share the same worldview or attitudes, or necessarily, have the same level of information about difference and what it means to be different. So I think in terms of strategies for promoting global empathy, I mean, as an educator, I always come back to the importance of education. And as much as I've been able to personally benefit from international travel, as we've seen our horizons shrink a little bit, in a sense, with the pandemic, there's still opportunities for us to know the people within our borders, right? So we don't have to go abroad to connect with or relate to people who come from different backgrounds and have different experiences. So I still value education as a way to very, and honestly, to very safely get outside of our comfort zone. But I recognize also that there's a potential for radical exposure, if you will, to difference. And I understand that other people might say we don't need to be safe about getting exposed to others. We need to put ourselves out there and let other people put themselves out there and have more of a kind of an in-your-face experience with that. And so I get that as well, but I think education and other community-based activities that promote dialogue are critical to getting experiences that make us aware of our own privilege, because I think until we see the privilege that we have, we cannot appreciate or respect the challenges that others face on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that. Cynthia, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think Professor Alyson really touched base on the pandemic. But what I will add is that it's not just the global pandemic as if of itself that really is put in that, right? It's like I was listening to a group of folks who were early on when COVID was barely breaking through in other countries. I was like, have we forgotten that we breathe the same air? Have we forgotten that the air essentially is circulating? It's all of us that are putting things out for it to be, healthy, or for it to be actually detrimental to our health. And I think that when we consider safety, or we consider what is the right way to put ourselves out there, I think it's still very constrained to what the social norms tell us it's safe. And as long as the othering of other people, or like putting that label in other folks with that safety restriction, like we don't get to explore other cultures, we don't get to explore other languages, it creates that barrier automatically that we have more things that are different than the things that we have in common. And the reality is that as an immigrant who arrived to the US in 2003, I lived my whole childhood and my formative years in Mexico, and came to Oklahoma, a place where immigrants were barely on the come up. But, I remember the very first place I visited on the South Side was the only store that was available at the time. And seeing that Honduran people, Salvadoran people, folks from Central and South America, pretty much the basic foods were the same as mine. And they had different names for the same type of food. I mean, clearly, there are things that are slightly different, but the fact that I had never been to Guatemala and we were eating basically the same meals, I'd never been to El Salvador and I was eating the same type of food that we're eating, it really talks about how much there is more to that global ideology, that we belong to each other without breaking the barriers also of the individualism that makes us unique and makes us also have that autonomy and that agency in the way that we show up in the world, right? And as long as we're not breaking down those things, I feel like we continue to see ourselves in silos. And it's something that I really learned when I migrated to the US, that the US calls themselves America. And I was like, was it one of the first things I asked my friends, America, that's the whole continent. What's wrong with y'all? And it started as mockery, but the longer I stayed in the States, the more visible it became that there's this ideology that we exist as people in this land that somehow doesn't connect to any other land. And that really is the toxic ideology that the United States has thrived off under colonialism and the imperialism that really allows it to continue to survive like that. But I know that that ideology is not going to get us through when it comes to like climate change, when it comes to what keeps us safe, when it comes to the response of a global pandemic. We cannot respond in silos.
Thank you for your thoughts. We actually have a couple of questions that based off of some of the things you mentioned. So yes, thank you. Estefania, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting word, right? Empathy. I think that in the work that I've been doing, and honestly, I think I have over the last couple of years realized like how deeply how I've been on a journey to really be able to embody what it means to organize for food sovereignty. And I came to the US when I was 18. I got a scholarship to go to college here, and that's how I came. And when I had, so my formative years are growing up in Ecuador, and 18 years of some of the most tumultuous political times that we have lived. And not, necessarily for like the American narrative. The American narrative would have you say that, oh, our countries are unstable, oh, our countries are like, just like people just running around and like have no civility, and just like uprisings are like a lot of people without discipline and jobs or some shit like that. Excuse my language. But what I lived through, and I am lucky that when I lived through these things, I actually had some radical teachers by my side that were able to interpret these things as the result of American imperialism. Like, so I lived knowing what was going on, and I'm very lucky to like have been allowed to interpret what was going on around me for the political economy that it was. And so what I learned, or as a young, mischievous youth, was that I knew who America was. And it's funny because like I had a similar experience when I came to the US first. And I think I wrote on a paper, like I refused to write Americans or America. And so I like, I did the like United States, like people from the United States. And my professor actually was like, what? You can just use America. And I was like, actually, no, like this is why. But then I ended up using America. That is where I was at, I think I wouldn't have done that now, but that's where I was at then. But yeah, I knew a lot of what had happened to my country before I was born. And I was lucky to be alive while the socialist revolution was basically setting itself up. It was there's many people that have been able to really retell the story of how that whole movement took place. And now, what is it? Many years later, 14 years later, since socialism came took a hold of Ecuadorian politics, I think that I can safely say that like my heart and the fight that I'm in is for food sovereignty, and also to get rid of the patriarchy, because the things that have happened in Ecuador, the kind of like reform and revolution that has happened in Ecuador, first and foremost because Indigenous people have our backs, and like they have created like whatever political like turmoil that we needed in order to get what we need, because we deserve it. It is because of Indigenous people that have risen up for that. And so I guess I will say that like the kinds of reforms or changes or policies or whatever that we have had in Ecuador are things that in the United States I feel like we couldn't even dream of in 100 years because of the lack of political will. And the gridlock and like absolute lack of democracy, because there's two parties. Like that is enough to say that there's no democracy in the United States, you know? But I think, you know, what killed that hope for us was the fact that the patriarchy and like governments are not built to admit mistakes. And that is how I view my own leadership and stuff moving forward. You know, that is one of the biggest lessons, is that actually we can do this. It's happened. It happens all the time in many places. And if we don't dismantle the like our ability to continue to like promote the same oppressions that got us there in the first place, which are sometimes really embodied by the patriarchy and that type of leadership, then yeah, it's really, really, really hard to get out of like an extractive model. And so I guess I ended up sharing all of this because I ultimately feel that, you know, like I actually don't think that people look enough to Ecuador. Like I think people in this country, I think, are obsessed with Marx. You know, I hear so much like Marx, Marx, Marx. And I love the fact that people in these times especially are really looking to like outside of this country for examples of what to do. But there's so much to learn from, truly, from indigenous movements in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Mexico. And so to me, I think maybe I would change the word from empathy to like interdependency, like actually believe that we are interdependent, believe that when the fungus that kills bananas hits Ecuador, you need to believe the bananas will end. And then you should care and think about why. You know, we are actually interdependent. And I think it's just a matter of time, you know, for indigenous people all over the world to join even stronger than they have before. And I think it's unavoidable. And what we can use empathy for specifically is to make change fast enough so that the collateral damage, you know, of capitalism crumbling away doesn't result in unsurmountable levels of destruction. So, okay, that's my take on empathy and interdependency.
Yes, definitely. I would say it's a very intricate, what's the word? Ideal. But yes, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on that first question. So our second question is based off of an article that our team lead Yusuf wrote. He's on the Zoom right now. But he wrote about how the term global citizen is oftentimes misused in the sense that traveling constitutes with what it means to be a global citizen versus someone who concerns themselves with listening and caring about international and transnational struggles. So based on this thought, my next question for you guys is, do you think that the term global citizen is appropriate, or might there be another useful term for those interested in global solidarity? So I'm going to start with Cynthia for this next question. It's kind of a big question, so I'll give you some time.
I'm like, this is a loaded question. You know, I think that often we get really caught up on what the term means rather than what it really should be or what it should mean. For me, language and language justice is forever evolving. So it may be that like global citizen came out to be with perfect and great intentions, and then it got co-opted by the cool kids who get to travel all over the world and have open borders because they're wealthy, because they're white, and because, you know, it comes with an open door and access to literally see migration as a luxury that they just have really quick and completely unrestricted access to. And so I think when I first heard the word, for me was digesting that like we are walking the earth, but that we belong to the earth, not that the earth belongs to us. And so that because we belong to the earth, that we needed to take care of it, right? In a global sense, rather than just seeing like where I'm at or where I'm the resident of or what I'm the citizen of. Like, I'm a Mexican citizen living in the US for the last 17 years. And I can tell you that I call both places home. And I miss both dearly whenever I'm not in what I consider home. But every time I go anywhere else, I'm also aware of like, what's the climate here like? You know, who are the people who are gonna feed me the best food, because they're the folks that are from here. Like, I'm not going to Qdoba or Panera when I'm visiting, you know, neighborhoods that are predominantly Cuban, for example, which I love their ceviche. And I roll up like, I know this is what I want to like eat, because it's folks who carry that identity with them regardless of the place that they are living in. And so I think that I couldn't tell you whether it's the right term, right? Like, because I think, you know, we are evolving every day, and if we weren't, then we really wouldn't be doing our job. Or we're challenging if the term itself is wrong, rather than like if the intention or what that interdependence, like Estefania shared, like, I know that we will find something, but I'm not really trying to get caught up on whether, like, does it make sense? I think that is the idea and the thinking behind it. Like, are we really looking at the world like we all depend on each other's like thriving and existence in order for us to be thriving and live into our full potential? And I don't know that that is in the confinements of just one lingo or like one specific term, but rather the way that we show up in each of the spaces, recognizing that, you know, even if I was to go back to Mexico, like the folks in that community don't owe me anything because I was born there, that I will have to respect the culture, the changes, everything that has happened over the last 17 years. Same thing as it was here. And so, yeah, I think that's what just comes up to mind. I'm hoping at the end of the day that we really take it back. You know what Estefania was sharing about Indigenous people, like, we have done literally everything in the United States to erase Indigenous folks. And even our COVID response has left their community like completely without any type of support for them to be able to sustain that. And we've done that every time there is something that is critical, we leave them out. And so I think that we should follow the leadership and the relationship that they have to the land to really understand what that means. Outside of the term itself, really about the building community and the relationship to the earth.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Estefania, I'll let you go next if you have anything you wanted to add.
Yeah. Cynthia, I feel like we would get along. I think for this one, I think I might actually, I might want to share the story of the salmon. And because, and this is not my story to share, but I would share it because, you know, as of last year, I got deeply involved in helping to lead a campaign that has now become like a global boycott of genetically engineered salmon that we're launching. So everybody should sign a petition. Everybody should do all the things. But this has really given me a different level of perspective about, I guess, this idea of global citizenship, and ultimately I really appreciate that you said migration as a word, you know, because the story of the salmon has really helped me understand that in particular. So right now what's going on is that this company Aqua Bounty wants to, or actually owns, a genetically modified species of salmon. So they have taken genes of 3 different salmon, put them together, and now they own that salmon. And the FDA and the US government allowed this through without doing environmental assessment. And actually today the court ruled in our favor and said that that actually the FDA cannot, like it is illegal for them to have given out that permit to develop the fish. However, I guess because it is the United States, the company can actually still continue with their task because they already got the approval from the FDA. So this is kind of like a retroactive lawsuit in a way. So we need to go harder with the boycott even more than ever because it seems like there's nothing to stop it. But so this company has patented an animal that is extremely sacred to all indigenous communities that live among like the Salmon. And many indigenous communities, many native tribes that have salmon in their creation story. So now salmon, like what I have learned, I think through living in the Pacific Northwest really, is like, okay, the life of the salmon is incredible because they are born somewhere along the watersheds or the river oceans. This would be for people that know salmon even more intimately, to know more about the specific conditions of the birthplace of the salmon. But they're basically born, and then they spend their entire lives traveling far and wide. And then when their life is about to be over, they actually somehow, some way, because they're so smart, managed to find the exact same spot where they were born in the whole amount of water that exists in the earth. They don't get lost. They come back to the exact same spot, and then they spawn there. They leave their eggs and they die. And so they basically sacrifice their bodies for the next generation. But that is the actual life cycle of the salmon. And so now so what AquaBounty is doing is they're taking these salmon and putting them in land-based fish farms to live their lives from beginning to end. And so, they're making them grow twice as bigger and all this stuff. And so, one part of this fight is just like, like biotechnology international, let's talk about that, right? But at the same time, like, this is the thing, right? It's like, what makes us people, what makes animals animals, what makes us us. Who are we, and how is that tied to the land? In the case of the salmon, like, what is a salmon without its journey, right? This is in California. There's indigenous people that have been organizing for years now, but now they're kind of really going hard and going public with their efforts to take down the Klamath Dam, because like Warren Buffett and these people have built a dam to interrupt the path of the salmon. So, so what is these walls? Right? So I guess with that is just like, I didn't even know my right to migrate, honestly, until I actually understood the story of the salmon. It took me going all the way from Ecuador through Texas, DC, Boston, and now Seattle in the Pacific Northwest, in the land of the salmon, to understand migration. And so I guess that tells you a little bit of like how much like we have to undo, like, how do I not know I'm migrating when I'm doing it? I don't understand. But that is what has happened, right? Because of these narratives that I think you are alluding to, Cynthia, right? So that's what happens to us, but who are we? I think we have so much room to figure that out. And so that to Citizen, I guess just to say that, right, Citizen enforces the walls, the dams. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Greiner, did you have anything you wanted to add to that question? And I can repeat it if you need me to.
No, you don't need to repeat it. That was a beautiful story. And thank you both, Cynthia as well, for your observations. I really appreciate them. So the term citizen is definitely fraught, for sure. Some people have offered probably even a worse term as an alternative. So I'll toss it out here. They've suggested a cosmopolitanism and cosmopolitan types. But I think that term also is fraught with the baggage of privilege as well. So I like interdependence. I like the points that Cynthia, you made about, indigenous people and the, connection to the earth. I think that's really important. And part of the other problem with the term citizen is the way it's bound up with our language about belonging to a specific country. We think of, I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a citizen of, Brazil or any of our other countries. And when you dig deeper in terms of what that means, we find that different countries have different rules and policies about excluding people from citizenship and erecting barriers to citizenship. So I will say my thinking has evolved on this. I mean, initially I really liked the term global citizen for the promise and the potential and the ideal of being one with this world. But I do think we want to be attentive to the problems with the term and the way the whole concept of citizenship is aligned with policies of exclusion. So I have tried to think of another term as an alternative, and maybe those in the audience can help us out here. I think we do need a different term.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. Our next question is, how has the US imperialism project affected nations in the global South? And in what ways has that led to the immigration crisis today? And I'm going to start with Estefania for this one.
Sure. Yeah, this is a good question because, in the organizing that I do, I think part of me is like, I feel like I really have held on to what I think is a fact that I know, that I was raised with or something. But like the reason why I have like my culture, the reason why I have the majority of things that I value about myself as a human being is because of indigenous people, that have safe kept our cultures and have like fought for their lands and have fought for as much as possible to resist. So I think part of me is like, now, at least now, like I think I'm really pivoting in a point in my life where I'm really focused on celebrating what has been like what it might have been cost, like what kind of resistance actually resulted in us actually being able to keep and have access to so many of the things despite so much being gone. And for us to just feel it in our bones, like the resilience of the people that have come before us and whatever happened to them. But yeah, ultimately though, I think that, so, in Uprooted and Rising, we call the bad guys big food. So, yeah, I think what results into like this fact is that big food in many different ways, like insidious ways and really obvious ways, like has and continues to destroy local and indigenous food systems. And still today, actually, the majority of the world somehow is still fed by 70% like small shareholder farmers. Like that is how resilient people are, to this madness of imperial power and weapons and all this stuff. We actually still grow the majority of the food, even though big food companies would have you thinking the other way because they want to continue to take our land. But that goes hand in hand. And, some of the things that are really, really sad, the things that really break my heart about living in the United States in this like reality is that like a lot of farm workers are indigenous people. Like that's actually who they are. They are indigenous people that are hella wise, that carry incredible amounts of knowledge in their bodies and in their like hands, and it's not, I think I heard someone else in another cool talk like this recently. Someone was actually saying how in the way that enslavers took people from Africa was also based on what they knew how to grow. Because they wanted to grow cotton in the United States. And so they brought people that knew how to grow that. And so they've used our skills, they've used our knowledge, they used all these things to make us do things for them. and take away our culture while they're at it. And that's still happening, I guess, is what it comes down to, is that a lot of the people that are migrating to, now the United States grows all kinds of things, all kinds of, tomatoes, all kinds of potatoes, all kinds of corn, like things that our people know how to grow because those things are actually ancestral, right, to us. And so it's this incredible irony to me how they need us so bad, but they don't want to pay us or acknowledge our humanity. Here in the United States, farm workers are continue to be excluded from basic labor rights, which is incredible, right? But the only reason why that is so is because it's the only way that the US can produce as much food as it does, for the cost that it does. And if it pays its workers, because if it decides to pay workers when they grow at this scale, then it would harm their competitiveness across the world. And that's ultimately what the US only cares about, is just they just want to expand. That is their project. And so I guess I would say, I think that the imperial project, despite, Biden winning and all of that, like, it's still pretty strong. This is the project, and the project is and has always been death. And so, people are migrating because they're escaping death in one way or another. And it's ironic that they're begging to be here when the US needs them. And so I think it's this cycle that I think will never end. And unless, we take the land back. So I think it's a project of, the way to stop the eternal cycle of colonization, I think, is like taking land back seriously. I mean, and y'all in Oklahoma, hey, y'all are a huge example over there. But in Ecuador, there's been 3 agricultural reforms where a lot of indigenous people were able to get their land back. That's a huge reason why we are the awesome country that we are, is because, actually a lot of land is in the hands of a lot of indigenous people. And so I think I would say that, and I think the immigration crisis is a crisis of displacement, on purpose, because it's wild that at any point anybody has considered that this is a choice, to go through so much violence, so much discrimination, to choose a life of it's a weird comparison, but it's kind of like abortion, like women just take care of everything, but somehow we are killers. Somehow we want to just kill these children, but actually we always have taken care of the home, we, like, femme people have always taken care of the children. And so it's one of those things where it's really hard to understand, but at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to like boarding schools and all the ways in which our education, Alyson was talking about that before, has taken over us. It's actually not our fault. It is that, like, we were like succumbed really hardcore to some education that makes us feel as though we actually need to respect these systems of violence and authority, or else. And that's ultimately, I think, what we need to be fighting, I think, is the, like, or else needs to end. Yeah, okay, that's enough.
Oh, thank you for your thoughts. I'll give it over to Dr. Greiner next.
Yes, thank you for the perspective, especially on agriculture, which is, it is certainly a form of big business. And so that's where I think I'll focus my comments. I mean, of course, we see what a lot of people have referred to as neocolonialism through the growth and expansion of our multinational corporations. So I think we need to continue to question the practices and the policies that allow them to continue to have such a dominant role in our world today. I mean, there are arguments. There's a separate debate we could get in, that there are arguments that suggest that corporations are now more powerful than states in many respects. And, you know, that's problematic when corporations take advantage of differences in environmental laws, right, to relocate their businesses so they can be less concerned about the environmental impacts that their actions, that the actions of the company or the business have in the local setting. So I do see business as a big part of the sort of ongoing imperial aspect of the United States. And that relates, I think, very directly to the immigration crisis, for sure. I mean, a huge motivating factor for many of immigrants is for economic purposes. We often talk in geography about push and pull factors, and a push and pull factor is the hope and opportunity for a job, which then also potentially is bound up as low-wage labor in many of these big multinational corporations. So I think that there are important connections there. And I know we could talk also about you know, our policies on our foreign policies in terms of places like the Middle East, for example, and Africa, and the global South as well. But let me stop there and let someone else have a voice.
All right. If you have anything to add, Cynthia, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sitting with how the U.S. continues to build on this like facade of what the American dream is, and you know, I think as I've grown to criticize really the system and the structures that we live in, it becomes even more clear of the mockery of like the land of the free and the country that incarcerates its people 5 times more likely than anywhere else in the world. But I think also the perfect examples of what's happening. I think of the investments that the United States continue to do on war in different parts of the world that then result into like forced migration, right? The displacement of people, food insecurity, food scarcity, because they're literally like buying out, drying out the land, and then just pulling away and leaving people without jobs, without food. And I think that so much of it comes back to what I consider like the double-sided blade that the United States really plays the imperialistic arm with. On one side is we welcome anyone, and then the other side is like, if you don't give us your land, we will make sure that you don't have a choice to stay in your land. And it's like cynical and also like terrifying. I think of, I migrated as an undocumented immigrant in 2003. My father had been a farm worker for a couple of years in California, and he ended up here in the middle of the Midwest in Oklahoma, where we had only like one tia, and that's how we ended up even here. And it was shocking to me how much there is a white savior complex, like growing and ongoing, about saving immigrants and saving people from violence, while also perpetrating the same violence by making the excuses of like, well, we need to blow up people so that then the other people can be safe. Like that is the only trade-off, right? Like some people must die so some other people can be saved. And nobody ever questions that. Like people are just like, yeah, budget for war, money, here it is, a blank check. Or we need to, go overseas and just like literally destroy the Middle East. But then we're gonna put a restriction of anybody who doesn't look white, who is not rich, to not be able to enter the country. After you spend trillions of dollars literally blowing up their neighborhoods, their families. And I don't think it's not visible because we see the pain and the impact, the human impact, not just the financial, right? Like I don't want it to be about the blank check. I really want it to be about the people who are dying, who die out of the response of self-inflicted fear that other people are going to come to hurt us. Well, if we weren't harming people in the first place, then there wouldn't be people who feel so strongly against us. If we were building community rather than writing checks for bombs, then maybe people will have food security, housing, and maybe it would be the land of the free if we didn't spend millions and millions of dollars on trying to erase social issues by caging people. And so I think that at the bottom of all of that is always going to be the placing one person against each other and creating the conditions in the ecosystem to where someone always is going to have less in order for you to have more. And as long as we continue to repeat that system, it won't just happen in the US, it will happen globally as it has been happening. Because injustice is not just happening in the US. It continues to repeat itself. There is a reason where there's a white supremacist in Brazil in power, mimicking exactly the white supremacists in power here.
Yes, definitely. It's not just in the US. Okay, so we're actually at the halfway point between our questions. So my next question, I'm going to start with Cynthia this time. It is, what are the connections between US-based social movements and global struggles for freedom?
Yeah, and I was really excited about this one. Part of my work at United We Dream, it's around mobilizing and empowering, but also like transforming immigrant youth. And immigrant youth comes from like, undocumented status to first generation, second generation. This year alone, we were able to host what we consider our Summit of Dreams, which were like literally debunking all of the things that we're having this conversation about, right? Like, what does it mean to live in a colonial state, and what does it mean to actually have them back? What are the conversations, the real conversations around abolition? And also like, how do we unlearn everything that the education system had tried to teach us that that's the way that we should think about things? And it was the first time because of COVID that we were not able to do that in person. So therefore we had a Zoom like week of like trainings and community gathering and just creating community within other folks. We were able to build community with people who are in Ireland. We had about 6 folks who are undocumented in Ireland. And they were able to share how they're organizing. We were able to share like what is the direct action tactics that we use. And I think for me, like immigration is obviously really, it's my lived experience, it's my story. I'm currently undocumented in the country that literally uses me as a political pawn, but at the same time wants to save me. It's really toxic. But then being able to hear other people in other countries talk about their experience and talk about the mirrors, right? Like the fact that because they were not light skinned, that they were sort of like the cast color, like the colorism really on how it was playing out. I particularly remember one of the persons that was able to join being a queer femme, and just being able to share that space with someone who's also going through like their own quest of really like finding themselves within themselves was a reminder of like what I went through at 16, 17, coming out of a closet, being queer, coming in another closet, being undocumented. So like this like double door busting and just like, what does that even mean for me? and having a conversation with someone who I currently can't meet, right? And they can't come here. But yet we built such a strong connection and we were able to really talk about that. I think it brought to light that like issues are never siloed. There's always somebody. And while the conditions may be slightly different, that like our struggle is a lot more shared than we even realize. And it takes really building that community to be able to see it. And so I think, you know, in Mexico, I remember growing up not having a lot of Black neighbors, but there is like Afro-Mexicanos that I never even realized that like that was part of our culture, even though I learned about our first like Black president in like hundreds of years. And so like the history that gets left behind intentionally because it's not the Spaniards coming in, like setting up a whole civilization, even though indigenous people had calendars, were able to thrive out of agriculture, like all of those things. I feel like it's a common denominator because it's white settler, like colonialism showing up by white folks really just taking over land. And I'm like, I know I'm gonna piss off the white folk, but like, yeah, like we have to break those layers down. And I don't know, maybe the more we continue to think about our global struggle being a lot more interconnected, the more that we're able to build that power to just create a community that is not surviving in silos and rather thriving.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for your thoughts. I'll pass it over to Dr. Greiner if you want to add anything.
Yeah, let me just say how refreshing it is to hear your voices, both of you, Cynthia and Estefania. I really appreciate your perspectives, and so it's good to hear. So I'll just add rather briefly that I think 2020 has in some ways sort of exploded in terms of social movements and the power of social movements. I am actually our department on campus here, after all these years, finally changed its name, and it will no longer recognize a former racist governor of our state. So that's really powerful, and that's because of a social movement. And so I think we need more of them, and I just support what you're doing, Cynthia. Just wow, it's go for it. We need this. So yeah.
Okay, Estefania, I'll let you go next. You want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, I think that I've been, okay, I guess the way that I think about, I definitely, the paradigm in which I operate now is like through like indigenous solidarity worldwide, like just thinking about it that way, because I, absolutely, like growing up in Ecuador, also the story, as much as I was being told the revolutionary story of my country, I was not being told the revolutionary story of the oppressor. And so I didn't know all the fights, and everything that Native American people have done in this country to get free, and everything that Black people had done in this country to get free. Like, I didn't know everything. And being in this country has been also a journey to learn those things, and not just like learn, oh, like that happened, but like, how did they do it? What was the crucial decision? Like, what went wrong? What happened? Why did that not, give them the result that they were hoping for, and that kind of thing. And so I've become kind of like a movement studier. I really have appreciated all the people that have come along my way here in the United States. Is an interesting irony for me, because I have actually gotten so much education in the United States, but it has been by no means by like the powers that be. It has been by all the dope people that I have surrounded myself by, and that have done the work and know a lot of cool stuff that I didn't know before. And so that said, I think it is definitely, I think I show up in spaces in organizing spaces in the United States with an internationalist perspective, because I feel not necessarily, I don't think that there's anything that Native people haven't done in this country. People talk about, like all different breadths of things and strategies right now. And I think that Native people have tried almost all of them. And so I think it's not to undermine the strategies that have been tried in the US, but I think it's more to recognize that I think there's a lot of personal habits, personal individualism that have formed within our movements as well. And that is the thing that I feel like we have a lot to learn from movements abroad. And I do take a lot of my inspiration from mostly Latin American, but I also take a lot of inspiration from the resistance in Palestine. And but yeah, so I guess I will say, in the case of Palestine, like the fight must be global, right? Like it is almost unbelievable that every country in the world except the United States and Israel recognize Palestine as a country. Like that tells us something, right? That tells us something really is off on an international level, that somehow, even when that is the fact, like it just isn't a fact. I don't understand, right? Like it's hard. It's really hard for the brain. But some examples that are really clear to me, and I've had the amazing privilege to meet people in both of these struggles, is both the Zapatistas and the landless workers of the MST. So it's indigenous and rural workers in Brazil coming together to form what I believe is the biggest peasant movement in the world in a single country. When Bolsonaro came into power, he immediately denominated the MST as a terrorist group and then assassinated 2 of their leaders. And that happened now, right? Like this is like, we're talking the 2000s in Brazil, like now. And these are, and that's really important because the MST in many ways are mentors to many people in the world that are trying to uprise in these ways. And at the same time, like as alarming as that is, like we in Uprooted and Rising, we've been in direct connection and collaboration with Levante, that is this like youth wing of the landless workers movement in Brazil. And they, unsurprisingly, for almost now 8 years, have already been building deep mutual aid networks between the rural lands, Black people in the favelas, and the poorest people in Brazil, to provide mutual aid, specifically to provide food directly from the lands and distribute that directly to the people. And that's just one thing that they've already been doing that I think now with a pandemic has forced the United States to do it, right? A pandemic has forced the United States to actually be interdependent with their neighbors. And myself, I'll push myself there too, because I actually have needed my friends through this pandemic deeply, materially. And I think, I grew up in a culture where like my grandma and my mom sometimes, but like a lot of my grandma does a lot of grocery shopping in the big markets, and then she like distributes it to everybody, that has a house. So like my sister, she had a baby, so she lives on her own with her babies and her husband, like my mom, and then herself. And so I think I have lived in interdependence, and I didn't even quite see it as that before. But yes, I think that is the thing in the United States that drives me a little nuts, and that I think is our demise in many ways, is that we actually are individuals, and this country allows us to be that. And I can say a lot more about that, but like that is, I think, what the enemy is for us as movement builders, and what I think we have a lot to learn from movements abroad, because they've already been assuming that governments don't work for the people. And I think we made a big mistake, in the US, that somehow, some way, it seemed as though the government would ever meet our needs. But hopefully those bubbles are being popped, and unfortunately the pandemic has really pushed it to the edge.
Yes, definitely. We've really seen a rise of the social movements this year as well, and in general, and they're so powerful too. Um, yeah. So next question, I'll start with Estefania for this one. Is what might solidarity or allyship look like for U.S. citizens interested in this work? And here's a second question that kind of bounces off of it, but you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But it's how might they fight against American exceptionalism?
Yeah, maybe I'll just piggyback off what I was saying then,
Yeah.
because I feel like there's and this is me, it's not that I don't care about the decision makers. It's just that I think it's been so long, right, in my own organizing. So, you know, now that I know what everything that has happened before me, then it's like, damn, a lot has happened, a lot has been tried. And ultimately, I really do feel that there are like our lives are embedded with capitalism, and some things are just necessary. You know, like the fact that the U.S. doesn't have universal healthcare is pretty wild. You know, because that is, and it's sad that the pandemic maybe might force people to actually understand that that is a right. Like that is a right in almost every country of the world. Like please, everybody, just know, like you have the right to, like, if you for whatever reason don't get any family, don't get married, don't have children, have no one, in the worst case, right, like no one and anyone to take care of you, you have the government should ensure a place where you can die, like, you know, or the government should ensure that you can try to live. Like if it helps to boil it down to those terms, you know, like, yeah, like that is what universal healthcare would bring. Just people not necessarily depending on having jobs in order to access health. Like that is just a basic right under these conditions, right? Under the conditions of that we pay taxes, we do the work for them, we're doing everything they're asking of us, right? They might as well just make sure that we're okay health-wise, and we deserve that. And so I feel like solid coming from the United States, which I call the belly of the beast, even though recognizing all the struggle that happens here, right? And like, and when I say that, I'm thinking about Native people as well. So not just people that have come in all these years, but people that were here. I think that it is going to be really important to figure out how we're going to fight how we are going to find ways to structure our lives differently. Because I mean, simply put, so La Via Campesina is the largest peasant movement in the world. They bring together all the peasant movements in the world. And La Via Campesina talks about, you know, like one of the ultimate things that we could accomplish in this world in terms of policy or whatever is to actually get food out of trade, which is really wild, right? Like that's really, that would do. So what that would do is I think that would push people to rely on local food systems, right? And so if that is the direction, then, you know, maybe we can all make a list of all the things that, and I'm not trying to say, you know, like I think in Ecuador, there was a point where the government was failing in protecting the jungle. And then because they failed, they turned on us and we're like, you capitalists, what, you don't want your cars, you don't want your, you know, things, you don't want, you know, like your electricity, like, is that, you know, what you want? And it's like, wait, you started this and then you failed and then you blamed us for wanting the things that come from petroleum, which is not our fault, that our entire lives are built around it. But so basically it's that, right? It's like the things that we ask, like we actually engage with what does it mean to end extraction and do that in this like fractal way. You know, someone brought this word back to my life recently and I was very grateful because I think that is manageable, I feel. I'm sure that many of you have dealt with burnout and doing too much and these kinds of things. But what I've boiled that down to, because I have like basically made the active decision to figure out how movement building is going to be part of my life and my habits and, you know, just how to make it fit, even though I fail many times. Like, I think that is the best way to be in solidarity with the world is to actually see your personal as an individual in this fractal of like taking down capitalism, or protecting yourselves as it crumbles. But yeah, I say that because I think the life of an American person is a fractal of what is happening around us, and that is a fractal of what's happening, you know, as a country overall. And because the US has so much influence over the entire world, anything that happens here, they go and take it out. If you invent any new biotechnology here, it's not like it's going to be just for the US. They're going to figure out a way to outcompete anything that isn't that anywhere else. And I see it in the lives of my nibblings, you know, like it makes me really sad when I see them basically just little by little by little adopt more and more and more American lifestyles, and continue to be in this paradigm of like, US is better, anything else is worse. Like, yeah, I think that if people in the United States are able to take responsibility in those ways, personally, and then reflecting their lives to be in the struggle as much as they can. And I'm saying this, like, I'm not talking to like wealthy people. Like, I actually think that it is on like all the people and all of us that struggle and all of us that organize to figure this out for ourselves so that we can run into all the barriers that everyone else is going to run into when this happens for real at a mass scale. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing. I'll let you go next, Cynthia.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Estefania placed it beautifully. I think the solidarity isn't just, I often feel like folks think that the ones that have more somehow have to be the ones that extend solidarity. So like if you're more financially well positioned, that you should give away all your money and that makes you be in solidarity, rather than like all of us really living what that solidarity means. So I've been having to do a lot of mutual aid here in Oklahoma, specifically as we're like one of the hotspots for community spread COVID. And it's just not even about like making sure somebody has food, but that they're able to continue like living where they're not constantly needing that like bailout in a way. Because then it makes us saviors rather than like, how do you find your own solutions so that you're able to sustain yourself and sustain others as well, as we are all dependent of each other. And so I think that, you know, Estefania was sharing is like, we talk about the work that we do and often it feels like it's another layer rather than like what we should be doing for ourselves, what we should be doing for one another. And then the piece around the US, I think that, you know, US citizens tend to see themselves as the solvers or solution people to the issues. But I'm a deep advocate for the fact that like the people directly impacted already have the solutions. We just probably don't have the means or don't have, between having to like pick between fight and flight, we haven't figured out yet how to get there, because we're constantly having to make decisions over like, do we organize right now or do we put food on the table, right? Like we have to make a choice. And so I think in the United States, it's like really breaking down the white savior narrative, really like stop romanticizing that like the US is the solution to the issues and the global, and rather like take responsibility of the role that the United States plays in the harm and the threat that they are to other countries by doing that, right? Like setting a standard that nothing else can outlive it and nothing else can be better. I think that's one of the best ways. I think that also the whole pull your own weight or like strap your boots, and like when you get it out or you get out of the community that you came up in, then like that makes you the exception. I think that's also another of the thinking that like really we need to debunk, because I feel like that allows people to feel the proximity to whiteness as what is going to save them or what makes them better. And when we begin to think of that proximity to whiteness as being what saves us, it's a really core, like at the core of that is the issue that we are eventually going to be in a table where none of us look like, nobody in the table looks like us. And when they have to make a decision, it's going to be us that they're going to sacrifice. And so like, I talk a lot around my friends of like, your proximity to whiteness won't save you. And it's real. It's real because we romanticize whiteness. And we romanticize it in the way that like we're digesting and consuming our media, you know, like our social media content is like, oh, you know, this light-skinned woman with blonde hair is the epitome of beauty. And I'm just like, we have to really take down that. It's going to take a lot of like unlearning and deconstructing in order for us to really get at the root of like, how do we move forward? Because we can't just keep building on something that is already harmful and expect that eventually it will just go away. I think what Estefania was sharing around like when we get to the core of like how we even exist, like resting is resistance, taking care of our bodies is resistance, having healthy relationships is resistance, thriving in our own skin and not having to live in the binary is resistance. And so you can start a revolution if you start it within you. And it can ripple as long as you're allowing other people to learn alongside with you through the mentorships and through the learnings. Because I think to the point that Estefania made, the stuff that we learn, we're not learning at school. We're not learning about organizing at school. I don't think, and right now there is a whole like curriculum about like how to be an organizer and work in nonprofits. And I'm like, you don't have to get a degree in organizing. Like our communities are organizing. Like, and so being able to really break that down, I think that begins to cut off the cycle on how we depend on something to give us a title in order for us to then be the masters of the experts of whatever knowledge we acquire in our lifetime.
Yes, that mindset is so, so important. Thank you for touching on that. I'll let Dr. Greiner go next. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. Cynthia, you are a difficult act to follow. Those are really, what you've said is really valuable, and I really appreciate it. And I speak from a position of whiteness, so yeah, on I too am fraught. Yikes. So I think to the point about exceptionalism, I've thought a lot. I've been wrestling a lot lately with, and Estefania, this kind of picks up on what your point earlier about the individual. So we have this difficult relationship between the individual and the collective, the individual and the society. And it just appears to me, based on my own individual personal experience, that I just see a lot more, to me, what seems to be a lot more selfishness in society, in spite of the social movements, which I find very powerful. But on a day-to-day basis, a lot of my encounters with different people often seem to pivot around what I find difficult to describe in terms other than just personal selfishness, from the daily frustrations of making it through day, and that bothers me in terms of the question that we started with this evening, the question of global citizenship. Because if we can't see beyond our own selfishness, then we're never gonna get there. And I wish I had an answer to how we displace the focus on selfishness. But I think it relates to I think it relates to a lot of the questions we've talked about. Empathy, and interdependence. And so I I've been attentive to American, and I recognize putting that in air quotes, right? American exceptionalism. I mean, there you go. The use of that term American is, we've co-opted that term, haven't we, to enhance our exceptionalism in a geographic sense. So I've been attentive to our exceptionalism. It is a theme that courses through the history of the United States, and it's a dangerous thing in terms of everything from trying to work on climate change to food sovereignty, right? To organizing social movements. And so I really want to end on a positive note here. But I think just raising awareness about the dangers of US exceptionalism is something that we need to do more of. Thank you.
Right, especially with everything that's happening right now. So our final question, I was going to say switching gears, but many of you guys did mention some of the things that I'm going to ask. So lastly, I'm just going to say, so how can we take these characteristics and use them in the fight against climate change? And so I'll start with Dr. Greiner for that one.
Oh my goodness. I wish I had some good actionable answers for you, but I think what our best approach right now may be looking at the role of cities in terms of taking a lead on changes to our rules and regulations that relate to climate aware policies. So our cities are doing a lot. And we have needed this in the absence of leadership at the federal level. So if nothing else, again, this comes back to social movements again. We've seen good strides. More needs to be done in the area of alternative energies and renewable energies. So I hope that we can continue to press on in that respect. I mean, this is the first generation that has had to reckon with the challenge of climate change refugees. So this is going to be an ongoing struggle for us. And these are big questions to tackle, but I think we just need to keep toe the line, hang in there, and we've got really brilliant minds working on these, and I think we just I'm not really satisfied with this answer, so I'm gonna turn it over to some others for some help here, because we've got a lot of work to do.
No, for sure. I'll let Estefania go next.
Okay, climate change. So I guess, one thing that I will say, maybe I'll start with, is that I think maybe climate change is probably one of the biggest co-optation, in general, of Indigenous struggle. And I'll say that because if I just say, okay, what is my analysis about where climate change comes from? I think that it comes from the destruction of local Indigenous food systems. It comes from what thwarts and destroys opportunities for food sovereignty, which, food sovereignty should be first and foremost that the people who had the land have it back in order to exercise their sovereignty, right? Languages are tied to land, food is tied to land, our bodies and diets, ancestral diets are tied to land. There's so many reasons why that makes sense. And so, but I do think that in the United States, especially, I feel like And I mean, we can go into a historical backlog of like how conservation, took over indigenous initiatives, how environmentalists took over indigenous initiatives. And I know that it is perceivably good, many of the things that have come from that, like organic food. But organic food came because a white woman wrote a book, y'all. Like, that is how that happened, because a white woman wrote a book saying that she discovered, like all these things, like how it would be so much better if it's agriculture. Anyways, the point obviously is to say that agriculture was always organic. Indigenous agriculture is organic. And actually, organic in the United States isn't even organic because there's a ton of chemicals that the USDA allows. So it's not even, it's a sham. There's a couple chemicals that are really important that are not in organic, and that's, why it might be healthy. But, then the powers that be are, and they have, will come out with studies saying like why organic is not actually better for you. It's like, yeah, it's actually not that much better for you because our vegetables have lost its quality in general in the United States because of the mass production of it, because of so many other reasons. But ultimately, you can say so many things and so many reasons and so much. And the reason why it's so overwhelming is because the truth of it all is that indigenous people need their land back. That is food sovereignty. And if justice for indigenous people isn't enough for people to want that to happen, then if we need something like climate change to force us to care, then I would say that like returning land to people that are going to treat it responsibly actually literally mitigates climate change, because carbon exists in the soil, in the ground. All these things are inside the ground for a reason, because the earth is really smart and it thought about it and was like, how to keep the conditions for the life on earth. That is why those minerals and those things exist under the earth, because that's where they're supposed to be. But also, there's many ways in which people who have been tied to a certain amount, like land, have discovered many things in that land and how to use different properties of that land. And ultimately, if we wouldn't have had such rampage, violent colonial times, especially in the last 50 years, the increase, of like everything that pollutes, basically, then we wouldn't have climate change. It's actually that easy, and I think that, I think sometimes it's easier maybe to think about a post-indigenous world, where like, it's like, well, we're already deep in this mess. So like, how are we just gonna like put a little Band-Aid on top of it and make everything okay? And just let science solve it, right? We will, instead of giving land back to indigenous people and trust that they will actually just take care of it and take care of all of us in it, let's build huge billion-dollar, trillion-dollar machines that will absorb carbon. Like, that is white supremacy at its best, actually. It's when they actually make us believe that solutions exist without reckoning with why the problem exists in the first place. And so, I guess I will say that I would love to reframe, like, power to all the young people that are now in the infrastructure of climate change movement building. But I will say that ultimately, for me, climate change, you should take a little left turn to food sovereignty road, fight for land back for all of indigenous people in the entire world, actually, not just in the US. As this is a concept that I think lives in a particular social way in the US, but actually it's pretty real everywhere. And so, I would say the way to mitigate climate change is to fight for food sovereignty.
Okay, great. I'll let you conclude, Cynthia, with the final question.
Thank you. I mean, plus, honestly, I feel like, I think whenever Estefania said that's white supremacy at its best, and I was like, yeah, and at its worst, because it sells us this ideology that somehow the same people that created all of this mess are the the people who are going to solve it, and the people who are impacted by the mess at the core of it somehow don't have any say on like, well, let's take a step back and see how is it that actually all of this came about. And I often think of how even medicine comes into play. Like, I have a headache, let's just take a couple of Advils and it will take the headache away. But like, why did you get a headache in the first place? And I think we operate from such a like solution based, but not actually getting deep into what is creating those issues. Oklahoma has a very strong group of indigenous leaders who are, you know, and that very like land back. I mean, Oklahoma has a lot to learn from just like how indigenous people have been able to survive in a state that literally, you know, romanticizes the land run, has completely isolated the cultures and the way of living, even, right, as an indigenous person in the state. And so I think they should be at the forefront. I agree with what Estefania said, like, we can't fix a problem by creating another problem, you know, like the cleanup of the oceans. Let's just make another machine that is creating some kind of other chemical that then we'll have to clean that up afterwards, but at least we won't have plastic. Like, well, and that means that we all have to make like conscious decisions of where we're investing, right? Like where we are, where we're consuming. And also, I think that many people outside of the US were already dependent on agriculture locally. Like we come from families that like we grew our own corn, we grew our own food. And then you get here and literally everything is prepackaged. It's shiny, you put it in water and it loses half of the color and half of the taste. And to me, that will never stop being shocking. And so I think that as long as you remain grounded in, we can't fix things in a temporary measure. We have to get at the core of how it came about and who we impacted first. And those people should be the first people to actually get a model out to like repair that and lead that, right? Like our way back into that. Yeah, and so to the point around migration and immigration, people are gonna continue to move. I mean, California, Florida, you know, so many of the coastlines are continuously like getting underwater. Maybe it's not happening today, maybe it's not happening tomorrow. But I mean, we're seeing Houston, every year you have a flood season where people are having to move up. And that's not just happening in the US, I mean, it's happening globally. And so we are not addressing how all of these things are actually, you know, she said sovereignty, well, they said sovereignty road, sovereignty food road. And I was like, yeah, like there is a moment where we all just have to like figure out that we're not in our own cool lane. Like we're all literally walking in the same roadway. And we just have to like collectively tie the loose ends to make sure that our fight really is getting at the core of everything. And at the core of that is like white supremacies and white people taking land that is not theirs.
Okay, so thank you guys. That was the last question planned that we had. And we opened it up to a Q&A on our live stream, and we did get one question in. So I'll let anyone who wants to answer this one. So the question is, do you have any tips on how to start getting involved with local community organizations as they are already working on interconnections as outsiders? And so some context, they're a newly arrived immigrant from the city, it looks like. So I'll let anyone piggyback off of that question.
I'm like, I feel like that kind of is getting thrown at me, but also feel free to build on. There's always more people that are currently already having the same ideas as you. And so I think it's always, you know, finding groups that are already probably doing the work that you are interested in, or even beginning to do the work that you're interested in and finding people that are having similar thinking. I think something that happens often is that people show up in a space also like, I'm here now, educate me and like teach me everything. And I think that it involves being able to show up with some knowledge so that you're able to enrich others as well. And that doesn't mean that you pick up a book and then read about, to the point Estefania made, a white woman talk about organic food, but it really, there is stories around indigenous folks who have migrated for centuries. Like the line around how border crossed us, we didn't cross the border is real. Like I have generations of family who lived in what then was Mexico because it was California, but now, I can't go back to Mexico because of my immigration status. There's almost a mockery of that. And I think if I found a home organizing here in Oklahoma after like 6 years that I have been living here, but it wasn't until it took like me really sitting there and thinking of how I wanted to show up and what I wanted to show up for, right? Because there is an intention that often comes that we just want to be part of a movement. But it's also like, how do I want to show up and why it's important and critical. And I was able to really like grow with this group. And now like, I feel like there is younger people than me joining this organization. I have a 7-year-old nephew who I'm like teaching about pronouns and like talking about like extending his small mind around like what is the binary and like how do you break out of it. And I couldn't think of like anybody giving me that knowledge or like mentoring me through that journey. And so even just like being able to, I believe in collective learning. And that doesn't come just from books. It comes from lived experience. It comes from like what others have also shown you. And so I think one of the ways is always gauge how you want to show up. Where do you show up? In Oklahoma, there is a lot of well-intentioned white folks doing immigrant right to work. But if it's not around my community, if it's not around our issues and what is impacting us, then you're not really leading any of the work that we need or supporting any of the work that we need, right? And so like, I could waste my time trying to educate people who want to be saviors, or I can spend my time empowering people who know what our struggle and shared experiences are and moving through that.
Thank you. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Estefania?
Yeah, I'll just shout out, I'm gonna put it in the chat here if it's possible to make it available to others, but Tulia, who's a member of the team at UNR, created this really great guide to plug into mutual aid. And I'm just gonna throw it out there because I think it's like, if you really don't know where to start, like just start with that. And so this is like for someone like that, actually, for someone that like is just really has a lot of energy, but doesn't know where to plug in. You're not connected to anybody that's organizing or anything like that. Just remember that mutual aid is kind of organizing. And so that is a really great place to start. And it has some really good questions, to like have, reflection questions for you to reflect on what are the resources and things, like available for people. What things do you need, like, do you need mutual aid? Because sometimes we don't even know, until we get sick or something. And so just wanted to shout that out. I think I did want to say maybe something about I think that there's one thing that I would hope that any organizer that at least works with me can take away, or with UNR in that case, is that I think that what is important to take note of is like what role you're playing, like actually try to define that for yourself. And I think this goes with what you were saying, Cynthia. And then also then take that up a notch and be like, oh, what role is that organization playing? What role are those guys playing? What role are those folks playing? And that should be part of your education, is actually just making sense of the ecology of things happening. What is your role in it? Totally plug into mutual aid, because that's the only thing that's going to keep you moving forward if you get stuck. But otherwise, yeah, like if you want to be taking down big food companies, come to Uprooted and Rising. But you know what? Other people, like there's other things that still need to happen, right? And that live it right in your community. And so if you have undocumented friends, community, anybody, you probably should be involved, right? In like knowing what you're gonna do when ICE comes to your door and tells you to, you know, do whatever with your citizenship. If that is you. Or anyways, I guess those are two examples because Cynthia and I are here, but that is just to say that like you should probably sign up for that journey of like making sense of everything around you and go strong with mutual aid.
Thank you. So we do have to wrap up soon, but lastly, I just wanted to open up the floor to you guys if you had any concluding remarks you wanted to add. I'll give you a second or two. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Oh, no, Cynthia, did you have something? Okay.
I want to just close out. One, I'm really grateful for the space and thank you for all the thorough questions. I feel like I was zooming in and out as I shared prior to jumping on this Zoom. And sometimes it's really regrounding to find yourself with other folks who are doing different work, but you're able to take a lot of learning from. I also know that, especially in the United States, there's going to be a shift of energy, and I'm really hoping so, regardless whether the current waiting period that we're under ends up, you know, changing the organizing grounds that we're currently under. But people tend to demobilize out of fear or out of comfort. People tend to be like, oh, well, tomorrow when I wake up and we have results, life is going to go back to the normal great and dandy. And that's not the case. And that's never the case for people who are directly impacted. And so I just wanted to close out with really being bold around like the commitment that you make to this work, not for the effort that you have to show up every time, everywhere, all the time, because that's going to lead you to burn out in the first whatever amount of time your body can sustain that, but to really commit to like what is your own learning, what is the things that you want to put out in the world, but also how you're taking care of the space that you're organizing so that you're not just mobilized, right? You're not only in rapid response, you're not only responding out of urgency, but also responding out of long sustainable like learnings and organizing so that other people that come before you and after you can continue to learn collectively. Yeah, and I know that maybe come January, some people are gonna sit back and pick up a new Netflix show and hang out, and we're still gonna be here doing the work. And so we hope and expect that when you're done with that session, you take care of yourself and get back to it, because we can't continue to carry the work alone. It's gonna take all of us.
Thank you. Any other concluding remarks from the panelists?
Just want to say thank you for holding this space and for inviting me to speak. And yeah, this is a really good conversation. I feel like this conversation doesn't happen enough. So I felt a lot of energy in participating in it because of that. So thank you for providing this space and and coming in on it with like a critique of the name itself. I feel like that does like a full circle of just exactly what learning is supposed to be about. Mm-hmm.
Of course. Well, we're glad you joined us today. Did you have anything final remarks you wanted to add, Dr. Greiner?
Yes, thank you so much, Monique and Cynthia and Estefania. It was a pleasure meeting you and just learning about your experiences and the work that you're doing. It's it's eye-opening. And I appreciate your sharing your very personal journeys and experiences. Wow, just really appreciate what you're doing. And Monique, thank you again for this opportunity. We need to have more dialogues like this for sure.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you guys again to Dr. Greiner, Estefania, and Cynthia. It was so great hearing about your stories and your different backgrounds and learning from each and every one of you guys. And I just want to thank you guys again for joining us today. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you guys. Right, we're good to go.